Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clarke. Men, take the mic.
That's right, it's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clarke. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. On this podcast, we'll review Michigan's win, take a look around the Big Ten and the entire football landscape, and we promise we'll be addressing Mel Tucker as well. But first, Greg, Michigan beats UNLV by a score of 35-7, and J.J. McCarthy was impressive once again.
I was talking after the game at Oscars, and I'm trying to think of a more impressive, say, couple games and just a feeling of a more impressive quarterback. Chad Henne came to mind as being really sharp. I'm actually trying to think of opponent quarterbacks that I've seen in the stadium that looked as efficient and sharp as JJ's looked the last couple games. And I know the opponents matter, okay? They definitely matter, but he's making some throws on the run, on the move. It's not like he's just sitting back there and winging the ball to open receivers.
There's always been quarterbacks that have come into Michigan Stadium one time and have had an outstanding game. But what we're talking about is back-to-back, absolutely efficient games. J.J. McCarthy has thrown 7 incompletions in his first 2 games. He was 22 of 25 for 278. You look at the statistics for the most efficient quarterbacking that's gone on in Michigan Stadium in the modern era. J.J. McCarthy has 2 of the top 3 in back-to-back weeks, no less.
Yeah, and over 85% completion rate. It's mostly JJ, but the receivers are getting the job done for the most part as well.
So Roman Wilson, he's got 5 touchdowns through 2 games, and wearing the number 1 jersey can be magic for a lot of people, and it certainly is for Roman Wilson. They're also firing the ball inside the paint to him. That is something they just did not do, Greg, last year. That when they were in the red zone, it was Corum and Edwards. And if they threw the ball, they threw it underneath to Corum or Edwards. So that was their mid-season thing for quite some time. And I think the change in quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinating philosophy, Sharon Moore is the offensive coordinator now. I think they're going to throw it to Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson inside the paint where it counts. And also a big topic of conversation that we've had in the last couple of weeks from experts like Al Borges, you've heard on the Michigan Insider with Sam Webb and Ira Weintraub, is his mechanics and his fundamentals are so much improved over where he was last year and the year before that.
Yeah, I actually got to meet JJ's private coach who's worked with him privately a little bit, and I texted him. I go, "This is unbelievable," and he kind of gave me the thumbs up. But it's kind of amazing though that we're talking so much about the passing game and JJ and the receivers. You would be shocked if you started the season and we said, "Hey, after these 2 opponents, we're going to be talking a lot about these receivers and JJ, how well they're doing," because you would say, "I can't believe we were throwing the ball that much," which is only about half the time. But still, against these 2, I think most people would have expected a ground and pound, long runs with Donovan, Corum dominating, and JJ throwing just to show a few things, on tape to the other teams. But it's been more than that. It's been fun.
The fans would be thrilled with all the passing that's going on, but it has come somewhat at the expense of the rushing has not kind of lived up to people's lofty expectations. What are those lofty expectations? Like 3 breakaway runs for 50 yards or more each and every single game. They're not seeing that right now. The running backs haven't been much of a highlight in the first 2 games. The defenses are loading up the boxes. Michigan's offense is taking what the defense is giving them, and they're throwing it in air a bit. And I think the new offensive line with the new faces and stuff are taking a little bit of time to gel. Now, pass protection-wise, they're doing really, really well. They haven't given up a sack. But the running game had 6 explosive running plays, but only 2 were by running backs. The other 4 explosives were done by quarterbacks in this one.
So are you concerned? Because I think if the things I heard on Twitter, that's where I go after the game, right, or during the game, and people mentioned Donovan as a concern, Corum not looking as explosive maybe as he has. He never was really super explosive, but he was, it does look like a little bit. Are you concerned at all, like as we move forward? Or is it way too early to even be concerned?
Well, exactly. There's this thing about pointing out facts and what you're seeing in the moment, there's a different step to say that you're concerned going forward. So as each game goes on and it doesn't change, the level of concern increases and strengthens.
We're putting you on notice then.
I'm just saying it's 2 games now, and so it's not a 1-game anomaly anymore. But to say that I'm concerned that Michigan won't be able to run the ball or they won't be able to win a Big Ten championship because of their first 2 games in the rushing battle, I'm not conceding a Big Ten trophy to any other team other than Michigan after 2 games at this moment. Blake Corum admits during the postgame presser that he isn't 100% yet, but he's getting there. And so maybe that will have something to do with it too, being able to make people miss.
Yeah, and speaking of like that pass protection, they were opening up like a big pocket, and there were several moments where it was clear JJ could have took off for 10 yards, but didn't. And he stepped up into the pocket, maybe a little more than the pocket, and then winged a pass to somebody in the flat few times.
That is a real threat of the offense where the quarterback takes off to scramble and he just stops on a dime right at the line of scrimmage and then throws to the open receiver. That is a valuable weapon to have because everybody knows JJ's threat as a runner. They close in. That leaves somebody wide open. Zing a dart. Now, defenses will learn from that too. Then JJ will learn, I will take off and run in that situation because they're not closing in on me. I might as well get going. Hey, defensive-wise, UNLV, unlike ECU, chose to throw deep, and that gave Michigan's defensive front a time to shine with 5 sacks in the first half. Big old Kenneth Grand, who I joke on the pregame show, is down to 350. Had a sack and a half, 2.5 tackles for a loss, and a pass broken up. And Greg, once again, the defense allowed just a bit over 100 yards through 3 quarters before the reserves come in. And actually, these opponents in ECU and UNLV are getting the majority of their yards in 1 quarter, the 4th quarter.
I guess if there was a question mark last game, how come no sacks? There was pressure, but how come there weren't any sacks? Well, what did we end up with, 5 sacks?
5 sacks because UNLV wanted to throw the ball deep. You got to buy time to be able to throw a deep ball, and the offensive line couldn't buy them any time, and Michigan's defensive front feasted.
Yeah, and so where do we leave this? I mean, JJ's efficiency is getting a ton of attention. At some point, Roman Wilson's name, if he keeps this up, you start drawing parallels again, Steve, back to 1991, because this is kind of what Desmond did, but he did it the entire season. It's almost unsustainable. That's why that season was so special. But 5 touchdowns through 2 games, those 2 guys are in the national spotlight right now.
And Roman Wilson, if he returned kicks, which he doesn't, but if he returned kicks, that would have given him more notice. And Michigan hasn't played a big-named opponent where he won the game like Desmond Howard did with the 4th and 1 pass from Elvis Gerback. But it doesn't matter right now. It's just 2 games in. We don't have to have a Heisman guy in the Heisman race right away.
And if history is, it's usually the Heisman is won, obviously later in the season in the big games for teams that win a lot of games. And I think Corum, if you're thinking about Corum in that department, he's got a few touchdowns or a couple touchdowns, right? So his stats are there. He's got the opportunity to shine. Donovan, too, other players. We got some storylines, though, that's for sure.
Greg, you like going down across all of the stadium, up high and down low, and you saw another celebrity sighting, which is becoming more and more usual. Some celebrity sighting outside the tunnel or outside Michigan Stadium. Who did you see this week?
It is remarkable. Like, for a college game, I mean, we get top stars, right? Of course, we've had Michael Jordan, Tom Brady. Those are obvious. Jeter, of course, with his ties to Michigan and Kalamazoo and the university. A-Rod was on the field yesterday. I believe his daughter has a daughter at Michigan.
Freshman.
And you recognize Jeter right away. Jordan is unmistakable. So A-Rod was hanging out inside the tunnel, out in the sunlight, but inside where the tunnel comes out on the field. And I kind of had to tilt my head and go, I think that's A-Rod. And I told my buddy photographer, I go, I think that's A-Rod. Is that A-Rod right there? And so it was kind of cool to see. It's always cool to see a celebrity. I mean, I didn't try to take a picture of him.
You didn't get a picture with his hand over his don't take a picture of me.
If I was 20.
I'm in the tunnel for a reason.
If I was 20. Yeah, I think he was trying to keep a low profile. So it's a little weird. A 52-year-old man sweating A-Rod.
If you were 20, you'd be...
I didn't look away either, though. Like, there's A-Rod.
And he doesn't have the courage to come look at me in the eye.
I tried to look at his name, see what they gave him an A-Rod. He had a credential on. It's always cool. Miguel Cabrera, that was a big deal. He came out last year. And also got to check out the Regents box. For the first time, I've never actually been in it.
I'll have a box of those. Give me 2 of those. Give me 6 of those.
The Regents box is up the west side of the stadium. The Regents area, that Regents box, since for many, many years, way before the renovation, it was kind of the only private, suite-like substance that was in Michigan Stadium before the renovation. And it was all right. I saw the Sklar Brothers, the comedy crew, which we went out and saw their Friday show, Steve. And they were up there. It's a little fancier than the club because it's a little more exclusive. You have to be on someone's special list to get in there. And
nice.
Yeah.
So after the game, it was made mention that, Mike Hart is the first black coach at Michigan, and he actually got credited for the win. And it's kind of funny. If you look at it, Mike Hart and Jay Harbaugh, they were head coaches for a half. They each get a coaching win on their resume, which oddly means that Michigan head coaches have more wins than Michigan has wins.
Yes. Assuming every game has a coach that has a win, which way back in the day, I don't know that we always had named a head coach. But yes, so Michigan has 991 wins, and we have 992 coaching victories in theory. In theory, yeah. So is it significant that he's the first black head coach at Michigan? I do want to bring this up to my class this week because it is history, absolutely. Race in athletics at Michigan and elsewhere is a very important topic. Often issues of race play out through sports. Some of our vivid memories of people taking stands against injustice along racial lines and gender happen in sports. I mean, we think of Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics all the time, a Buckeye, by the way. And we think of Muhammad Ali and his stance on the Vietnam War and other things, right? So it matters. But we also has, and Mike Hart mentioned, his boss is an African-American in Ward Manuel. And we've had multiple African-American athletic directors who are in charge of the coaches. But the fact is, for the last at least 30 years, at least half the team is made up of minorities. And yeah, you start to look, well, it is a bit of at this point that Michigan has not had a black coach. Hadn't even thought about it. It's interesting. So do we have a problem? Well, the fact is there was injustice over a great deal of time. When Jack Harbaugh coached, you could probably count the African-American assistants on 1 or 2 hands in the Big Ten is my guess. I didn't go through and count. I bring up Jack Harbaugh for a specific reason. You're seeing 3 generations of white coaches in the Harbaugh family on the sideline. Literally, Jake coached the first half, right? Jack's grandson. Well, black people grew up not thinking about they could be coached, right? You have generations of people like that through the 60s, and only in the 70s you start to get integrated. It starts to become accepted that they're on coaching staffs. It does take time, but then do we have a problem? So I guess you would look at our staff and go, is it made up of coaches that reflect the players, the teams, the history? And I'd say probably now, yeah. But I do think it's a consideration when Harbaugh leaves for our next coach.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a problem. I would suggest to you that during this interim, or if Jim Harbaugh would leave, that Sharon Moore might get one of the first looks. Mike Hart, on multiple occasions, he wants to be a head coach, and it seems like more than likely he's going to be at some point. It's just a matter of where. And if he gets a head coaching job outside, he could have a resume that could bring him back to Michigan in the future.
That's right.
These things I think are always possible, and I don't even skip a beat thinking about it. So
right, you don't, but racism still exists.
Absolutely.
There are people out there, like it or not, that may have an issue or may be making a judgment based on race when they talk about coach, and or maybe critical of a coach with racist undertones to it. It's a fact. We haven't really seen a point where women have been involved much in coaching. Actually, Michigan's been a little more progressive in that department. I think you'll see more of that. I think you'll see more women referees in the game too. So we'll see.
J.J. McCarthy, 47-yard touchdown pass. You want to explain the significance of that?
Yeah, so he has a friend who passed named Ryan Keeler, a good friend of J.J. and Zandon.
Yeah, then when they were teammates in Illinois, this was pre-IMG.
Yeah, and so J.J., in honor of him, said he's going to dedicate this game to him. He wrote 47, his number, on his hand, threw a 47-yard touchdown, I believe, to Roman Wilson. Yeah, and as I understand it, even as the broadcast was kind of talking about it, it kind of happened. And I'm not big into that like numerology stuff, like the significance of it. But the bottom line is, it sounds like it was special to JJ and a lot of people, and it's cool. And it did bring to mind the 87-yard touchdown run at Notre Dame in 2010 after Ron Kramer died that morning. It was announced that Ron Kramer had passed away, who famously is number 87. His number is retired at Schumacher Hall. And Desmond took off in one of the best plays that I can remember seeing. I was there for 87 yards, and I remember that wasn't lost on people either. And you know what? I don't think this is God recognizing the situation or anything like that, or other forces, but I do think people take a lot in that, and it's a nice memory, for people, and that's it. So
yeah, JJ seemed to think so, saying that in the post-game press conference. And this was the first game, Greg, on CBS in a long time. And I can't believe that the last CBS broadcast at Michigan Stadium was in 1986, a 20-17 victory from the Wolverines against Iowa, led by quarterback Jim Harbaugh. It is one of my favorite games of all time. And this was before I met my wife, who, is an Iowa grad, based on the circumstances of the previous year. In 1985, Michigan and Iowa was number 1 and number 2. Michigan went into Iowa City, and with about 6 minutes left to go in the ballgame in 1985, Iowa drove the field, third down conversions, got themselves into field goal range, let time get to about 0, and kicked the game-winning kick, and Michigan lost their first game. Iowa remains number 1, and as a 14-year-old kid, just devastated and hurt by it. The very next year, can't wait to beat the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, they weren't number 1 and 2 in 1986, but it was a rematch of ranked teams. And once again, Iowa got the ball with about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and they started driving down the field. The game was tied, and a field goal was going to win. And you could just see the slow death by 1,000 cuts that Iowa was going to win this game this way. And on a 3rd and 2, already within field goal range, they did a pitch, and they bobbled the pitch. And Gary Moeller's son, Andy, was the first who could have gotten to the football. But instead, he decided to take out the nearest player to the football first before reaching out and getting it. I can't remember if he actually recovered the fumble, but it was key that he actually took the nearest Iowa player out that could have contended to get that ball. It's such a smart football play.
Yeah.
And then now Michigan goes into a 2-minute drill. And Mike Gillette kicks the game-winning field goal and reverses the tables on what looked like be history repeating itself. And even though it didn't win the Big Ten championship for Michigan in the moment, beating Ohio State did later on in the season, that to me is one of my favorite games.
That's awesome. I think Harbaugh caused 3 turnovers in the first half of that game. I don't think it was his finest performance either. So from 83 to that game, there were 3 games between Iowa and Michigan that basically came down to the last second, and the last second field goal, Michigan winning 2 of them. The 83 game that you didn't mention was Bob Bergeron, the famous kick. And I think that Gillette kick was the first time, though, that Michigan won a game as the clock expired on a field goal. Brabs did it later against Washington. And I know now we have overtime, so it's a little different. Amazing. What else from that game? Oh, I saw that you were going to talk about it, and I looked at the Michigan Daily, and here's a little quinky dink. The article was written by a woman named Barb McQuaid, and some of you who watch news TV and political TV, Barb McQuaid is in the U of M Law School, and she's an analyst on MSNBC all the time. She worked for the Justice Department and all this stuff. She's going to come and speak to my class here in a couple weeks.
Nice.
Yeah, so she's a former Daily writer who's done good in those circles, kind of reliving my old political days. She's wonderful. So that was cool. Good memory, man.
Let's take a look around the Big Ten real quick before we get into halftime. Ohio State only gets 35 points against Youngstown State, but at least they get the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. 2 touchdowns and 122 yards by the end of the first quarter. Ryan Day, though, didn't like his defense in this one at all.
It's the first time we're talking about an Ohio State team where their quarterback isn't clearly the best quarterback in the Big Ten, and they're still trying to sort that out. So, yeah, Ryan Day's taking some shots on Twitter, too. Quite a bit. So we'll see where this plays out.
Penn State beats Delaware 63-7. I think, Greg, Michigan so psychologically damaged Penn State in Ann Arbor last year that Penn State decided to schedule an FCS Michigan lookalike to make them believe that they can beat Michigan when they face each other in Happy Valley in November.
Yes, because the Blue Hens wear the winged helmets. Actually, it's high. There's actually a story. It's related to Michigan, but theirs are a little lighter blue, and they look kind of weird.
Wisconsin.
It looks like a disco version of the Michigan helmet, which we should
different.
never go to.
I remember the first time I saw it in the early 80s, I thought Michigan was playing on TV, and it was not them. It was Delaware, and it was just very, very strange. Wisconsin loses at Washington State. Now, they were a favorite to go into Pac-12 territory and win, and that's usually not the case when the Big Ten goes out on the West Coast, and this was a late game for them as well. They just turned the ball over way too much. Tanner Mordecai, not the great quarterback that we kind of expected to see in the summer. He's turned the ball over quite a bit himself. Not a good look for the Big Ten when the Big West favorite loses to Washington State.
Fair, but Wisconsin, fickle. This is a free year for them. But I think people expected a little more.
Iowa and Minnesota, by the way, the only teams in the West that haven't lost. Again, not exactly a great sign for the West or a great sign for the Big Ten in terms of competition. Look, after the first few games, Michigan going on the road to Minnesota and Nebraska doesn't seem to be as daunting as it did maybe 3 weeks ago. Ohio State having to go into Madison doesn't seem to be as daunting as it was a few weeks ago. And Penn State is playing Illinois this Saturday at Illinois. Illinois lost to Kansas, and they were down as much as 34-7 in the third quarter.
No, I didn't see much of that. I saw some of the Cyhawk game, and I think it's a cool rivalry. I mean, to me, that extends beyond Iowa, but just a classic game that kind of played out exactly how everyone thought it would.
Your band members get assaulted in the Iowa State rivalry. I mean, this is a nasty rivalry, as they say, but Illinois is on your sell list this week, Greg. Last week we started this, kind of sell on teams that you just don't think have any chance of winning the Big Ten. And Northwestern was the start in week 1, and you're putting Illinois on your sell list in week 2.
It's my eliminator tournament for Big Ten teams. And I think it's Illinois. Boy, really disappointing result, but not upset mainly because of their weird perspective of our rivalry that they have with us. Steve, are you aware of this situation?
I'm very aware of this.
That Illinois fans feel like we're rivals. No, you're not our rival. You're not even on like the 6 deep list of who might be rivals after
Ohio State.
Got it.
Michigan State.
100.
Penn State. Higher.
I put Notre Dame over Penn State. But
okay, I'm not ranking them.
Oh, sure. You're ahead of Illinois. Yeah,
ahead
absolutely.
of Illinois.
Minnesota.
Penn State, Illinois. Minnesota.
I put Iowa up ahead of them just because of our relationship with Bump Elliott and all the history there and the Hayden Fry stuff. I mean, that you just talked about. They are pretty far down.
It's kind of like the hidden Bowling Green versus Purdue rivalry that nobody ever talks about.
Honestly, Steve, Wisconsin. Let's keep going. Wisconsin, you could argue Northwestern because of fits and tough games we've had with them. Like, as far as significance, it's strange. So why do they feel this way? So I feel like there's a couple things. They do have history with us. So in the 1920s, they had a great coach, Bob Zupke. They had the great Red Grange, who might be the most significant college football player, in history for what he did, and he left early for the NFL. It's a whole big deal. Take my history class, right? So they had great teams. They have an iconic stadium built before Michigan Stadium, Memorial Stadium. In the 60s, they had Dick Butkus. They had Pete Elliott, who played at Michigan, as their coach and won a Rose Bowl. In the 1980s, there was the end of the 70s, rather. In the 80s, Gary Moeller was their coach, got fired. They hired Mike White, who both thought cheated, and there was a whole thing back and forth with them. So there is stuff there. They are one of the original members of the Big Ten. So there are things and there are moments, but in Michigan's mind, none of that lasted. And that's why we can rattle off 8 teams ahead of us in the rivalry. So they are done, Steve. They are done. Would you agree with me? They have no chance to win the Big Ten.
Simply because they're from the West, I would say they have no chance of winning the Big Ten. But, I think with Ryan Walters leaving the Fighting Illini and the defensive trademark that they were setting the standard with Chase Brown no longer being their running back, I think Illinois has a hill to climb to get back into contention.
Well, they do, and props to Purdue. 5.5-hour weather delay at Virginia Tech and grinding that one out. I mean, so keep an eye on them, I guess.
Purdue had a 17-0 lead It was 17-17 at halftime. And then the only score came midway through the fourth quarter. And Hudson Card is a quarterback to reckon with. Michigan hosting Purdue, I believe, on a night game early November, I think Saturday the 4th. All right, as promised and what people have been waiting for, Mel Tucker has been in the news a lot around here in the state of Michigan and nationally over the last few days. We will get into it right after this. That means it's halftime on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clarke, and our show is brought to you by Peak Wealth Management and their president, Nick Hopwood.
Nick, you're the sponsor, you're the founder, but one thing I've also got to know is your team. And you have an awesome team of people. So if you think Nick is this guy working out of his garage, no, beautiful office, awesome team, great support staff. And I got to know them a little bit too from when I was on your podcast and then again when I came to speak. So that was really cool.
Well, we're proud of our team, and we have a team of 3 CFPs. So a deep stable, a deep bench of quality guys offering advice. And on the operations side, Patty, Gwen, and Connie, they all have over 15 years of experience in the industry. So when you add us all up, we're pushing 100 years of collective wisdom.
Very nice.
Folks, do yourself a favor. If you have a tax question or you're wondering about an age-appropriate portfolio for your retirement, go to Nick's website at peakwm.com and give him a call.
Yes. So, Steve, we got to talk about Mel Tucker and the situation up the road, and actually got tipped off to this about a week ago by a very reliable source, but not double-sourced, not a story. I don't try to break news. I actually did share what I knew with Steve ahead of time because it was nondescript. We didn't have all the details, but knew enough from this source that something like this was coming. Actually didn't think it was going to come this quick. Here it is.
Yeah, so Mel Tucker, as you already know, is accused of having a non-consensual sexual relationship with a woman who's a rape survivor whose mission is to educate students about non-consensual sexual relationships. I mean, just to say that is just a little bit bewildering. Brenda Tracy has gone to several college campuses, including the University of Michigan, to share her story of what happened to her by 4 men, including 2 players at Oregon State and a high school recruit 25 years ago. The players on campus, they sign a symbolic pledge to do the necessary things to ensure that whatever they do, that sexual contact is consensual, that nobody can be a victim. It's not a secret when they make this pledge. It's promoted on social media. We know of this. We've known of the name. What has been kind of a secret, however, is the personal relationship that Tucker was having with Tracy. They do not deny having a relationship that was turning from professional to personal. They do not deny that Tucker engaged in a physical act of phone sex. There is, however, Greg, a difference of opinion of whether that act was consensual. He thinks it was. She says she was traumatized by what he was doing physically over the phone. And look, folks, we're not going to get into the details. If you want to be aware of it, you already have, or you will find out. We don't need to do that here. Tracy has filed a complaint with Michigan State University's Title IX office. The investigation has been ongoing for quite some time and continues to resume, if it gets that far now, because it's now in the public, in October. Greg, you and I are not going to try this case. We are not going to make jokes. But the allegations in this environment at Michigan State, in the Big Ten as a whole, this is not a Michigan State thing, make this all extremely unsettling. First of all, could this be a fireable offense? Is this a private matter or is it public? A lot of people have different sides on where they come across. How about you?
Everybody looks bad. I don't think it's funny at all. Forget how you feel about Mel Tucker, rivalry aside. And it looks bad. He has admitted to an error of judgment. At best, it's a horrible error of judgment. They do have the right to have a relationship. She has the right to have a relationship with him. Unless the only thing comes up is, are there HR concerns? Are there Title IX concerns? Are there obviously legal concerns around harassment, which we're not going to try here? But the fact is, this isn't like a woman from Lansing Country Club that Tucker had a relationship with. She did do work for the university, did get paid for work for the university, but I don't know whether she was an employee or a contractor and how contractors are protected by MSU, and whether Tucker was required to report their relationship, which is often the case if she were an employee. So there's so much there. There does seem to be plenty of grounds, though, for state, if they are thinking this is a bad situation, to get around and talk about termination of Tucker. There will be a lot of discussions in the coming days. We'll see where it goes.
Termination could cause a wipeout of that $80 million contract that is of growing regret for the sheer size and number.
There is a very loose clause in his contract around behavior, but again, that doesn't mean it's enforceable, right? You can't say, well, you ran a red light and got a ticket, therefore you embarrassed the university. That's not going to hold up. So just because there's loose language in his contract about embarrassing the university, it's in there, this is embarrassing. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. So if you take all the covers off, given the situation, and frankly, yes, there are people that are probably concerned about his contract and where the football team has headed given last year, you do have to wonder if all those things are going to come into play and go, it's time to move on. We'll see.
It all comes in the midst of Michigan State's football team trying to prepare for the Washington Huskies, in which Michigan State's an underdog to Michael Penix and company coming in. It's completely unrelated about how they play on the field with what this issue is, but it's not going to help.
No, it's not. This was the game they circled, which is really going to see what this team had, really what Noah Kim had, their quarterback with Peyton Thorne at Auburn. Yeah, it's tough. And I will add that Tracy was the honorary captain, Brenda Tracy, for the 2018 Michigan game. And I think I met her because she did some rounds with the media and stuff when she was here. I remember that. It was kind of a big deal at Michigan. And I know she had the same role in a spring game at Michigan State. So, yeah, it's bad. And, Steve, you mentioned, like, the cloud over the Big Ten, and frankly, Penn State, Michigan, others.
Ohio State, too.
You know, around treatment of people. You can extend it to other programs who have had other issues with other coaches. And this is right in the middle of that. If you believe all the things that he's accused of, it's right in the middle of that, a powerful position.
There's not much leniency here.
Yeah.
Based on what's happened.
I know a lot of fans are upset. A lot of fans who support Tucker are reeling right now and saying, play it out. Like we've talked about in the show, I hate trials by Twitter.
Yeah, and sports talk radio for that matter.
Well, sports talk radio. Hopefully not this podcast, but he absolutely has the right to defend himself. What he can't defend is an error in judgment, which I think he's already copped to. This was just horrible judgment, not only because of who she is and what her person is, but her relationship with the team. That's really where it gets rough. It doesn't make anybody look good. And of course, because it's Michigan State, you see the worst side of some Michigan fans making stupid jokes about it and stuff. I know it's the nature of the game, Steve, but come on. As far as we know, didn't have to deal with a lot of these. At least they didn't make public back, say, in the Bo era with headlines and things like that. We all know about the Anderson case and all that stuff going on. But I'd be curious what Bruce Mate says about how state has handled this point, which is nothing, as far as we know, other than support the investigation. Obviously, the news got FOIA'd, and USA Today, I think, broke the story. So they must have known that details of the case were out there. So why didn't they get ahead of it and at least say, look, there's an investigation, and at least say, here's what we can share, even if you don't even name names at the time, that it's involving football staff or important staff of our athletic department. I don't know. It seems like they could have done something, though. I know the accuser has rights and Mel Tucker have rights, but knowing that the information was out there and going to be reported on, in my opinion, they should have got in front of it and said something right ahead of time.
I'll wrap it up with this, is the way all the stories came out in the middle of the night and the level of detail in the USA Today story suggests they've been sitting on this for a long time.
Who's they?
USA Today.
Okay, so yes.
And I'll tell you, the rest of the media outlets that are double reporting on it, are basically following in USA Today's wheelhouse. They know all about the details ahead of time. These stories were being released at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. They had information just waiting to hit submit. and everybody was very quick to follow up with their own thing on it. You just can't do that in an hour. They had their information too.
Yep. It's not fun or funny to me at all, as I've made very clear. And frankly, not even for Mel Tucker, because this is probably going to take down a guy. We talked about black coaches. The fact is he is a black coach, and I think a lot of people are rooting for him outside of our state, and it's rough. We'd like opposing coaches, Ohio State, Michigan State, fired because we beat them on the field, okay, not because of this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
We want them to lose control. We're not sure if they have control of their team, a la Bobby Williams, not because of bad judgment like this, or worse, which we'll find out.
Let's continue with a look of our national stories that are going on. The game last Saturday between Texas and Alabama ended up with two programs now going in different directions. Texas handling Alabama in Tuscaloosa at Bryant-Denny Stadium at night was a revelation. A year ago, Nick Saban was undefeated against his former assistants and squeaked out a winner against Texas in Austin. Now he's lost 3 games to assistants. And there was talk previous to this game for a week about whether the so-called tide has changed with Alabama and Texas. And the consensus I was getting, Greg, was that experts were believing that Texas was better than Alabama at a lot of key positions, like quarterback, and at the trenches, where I think are the 3 most important positions in the game of football in determining who's better than the other. But like me and a whole bunch of other people couldn't believe that Texas could actually live up to their own preseason expectations and win in that environment under the circumstances. And reputations weigh on people who make bold choices. So they take the safe way out and they say, well, Alabama's going to win because Texas has never done it before and you got to show it to me. Well, now there's probably going to be a lot of second guessing and a lot of I told you so's, but didn't actually make the prediction that Texas has achieved that level and Alabama is now on a slide.
Guilty. Same. They were, 6.5 point underdogs in there, and I'd have a hard time taking Texas because of their reputation. The same reason it was so kind of overwhelming for all of us when we finally beat Ohio State, because you just hadn't got it done. So it reminded me of the way that Florida State kind of tossed LSU around at the end of the game in week 0. Right? And I had several moments in that Texas-Alabama game where I just raised my eyebrows and go, whoa, no, they looked the part. They looked the part. Their sideline looked the part. It was impressive. Here's what I see. I see that physicality at the end of the games. Those are the teams that are like putting teams away. You still need the playmakers and stuff like that. But it's really these teams like Michigan in the last couple of years that develop and can choke you out, because guys coming out of high school, they're not those guys. They have to be developed. You have to develop them. You can recruit amazing athletes out of high school, but you have to develop them to be able to really manhandle people. And I think that's the difference. Georgia's still doing it, but Michigan's in that category now. And honestly, I saw Texas do it. And like I said, I saw Florida State do it at the end of their game. And damn, I was shocked, Steve.
So right now, the Big 12 has a playoff contender. And I think everybody's going to say that Texas is living up to the billing. There's a lot of season to go where a mistake can be made and you can lose a game. But it looks like the Big 12 could field a playoff contender if Texas even only has 1 loss. They still have the win over Alabama at their place at night.
Yeah, unless we forget that Texas team is coming here to Ann Arbor almost exactly this time next year.
We'll see.
Oh, that's true. I fell into my own little trap of assuming next year's schedule is all fine. I would assume the out-of-conference schedule, but yes, could be. But they've already made arrangements with that with the TV network, Steve, so I think that one's going to hold.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Right.
Let's talk about things we know for sure.
Let me ask you this.
What's that?
Do you want to play Tech? Do you want them to come here? I absolutely want to see that game.
Why not? I think Michigan might be in a transition year in 2024, but that's another topic for another day. Let me get to what an actual schedule is going to look like. Bowling Green is coming into Ann Arbor, and it's going to be kind of like a Michigan reunion. You got former Michigan quarterbacks coach Scott Loeffler, who just got a contract extension through 2025. He's coming in here. Steve Morrison, former linebacker of Michigan in the 1990s. He's a part of that 5 championship straight appearances from 89 through 93. He was a part of a few of those teams back then. And he's a defensive coordinator, and the passing game coordinator and receivers coach is Eric Sue Campbell. I mean, he and Jim Harbaugh were teammates. So those 3 former Michigan guys are part of what's coming into Ann Arbor this Saturday.
Night game, we're going to see those lights, finally, the LED lights that were installed in the stadium, the full power of that. There's always a cool vibe, even though it's Bowling Green for a night game. I want to see if JJ continues what he's got. Is there anyone, Steve, I need to look out for on the Bowling Green team?
Well, I mean, just a few things to know. Like Bowling Green lost to Liberty in week 1, but they completely turned it around against Eastern Illinois, scoring on 6 and 9 possessions, multiple touchdown passes. The former IU quarterback last year when Michigan went into Bloomington, he is now the starting quarterback at Bowling Green. His name is Connor Bazelak. He threw for 71 yards and 3 picks 2 weeks ago. Last Saturday, Greg, he threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So quite a contrast. And the other thing that I think is kind of interesting is that Teron Keefe, their leading receiver, is also their second leading rusher.
Okay, very interesting. So what, reverses, or do they use them in the backfield?
Have no idea.
Okay.
I have not watched the Liberty game or the Eastern Illinois game. No,
You missed the Liberty game.
I did. I missed the Liberty game.
So Bowling Green, our ties. CCHA hockey. Bowling Green used to have a great hockey team. And the CCHA, of course, our league we used to play in before the Big Ten Conference had a hockey league. Mr. Spots, our beloved cheesesteak and wing place on State Street, right on campus, was founded at Bowling Green by the owner, Keith. I don't know Keith. I forget Keith's last name.
McHenry?
Yeah, Keith McHenry founded it there with his buddies, I believe, at Bowling Green.
The best player on their offense is Odu Hilaire. He's a receiver. He's got a couple of touchdowns already on the season. He doesn't have 5 like Roman Wilson does, but he does have a pair. And the Bowling Green defense last year, they forced 23 turnovers, which was the same amount as Iowa last year. Greg, I expect Michigan to be a big favorite in this game as well as they were with ECU and UNLV.
Bowling Green or otherwise, a lot of these guys are used to playing under the lights on Friday, and it always has a different vibe. So we'll see how they perform under the lights. Looking for more breakout running. That's kind of what I'm watching for. And to see if Roman and JJ can kind of keep up their ridiculous paces of performance. So we'll see. Oh, gotta have a quick hit on the Lions, Steve. Beating the defending Super Bowl champs. Hearing all this chatter after the game about, Kelsey didn't play, and, Hutchinson late hit on Mahomes. Sounds like loser talk coming from the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champs, beaten in their own house by the Lions. Honestly, it just fuels me. I love all the chatter.
Well,
Bring
it sounds
on.
familiar because Lions fans create this chatter, and they're always on the wrong side. They're on the L side so much to actually see the same arguments coming out of somebody else's mouth why the Lions win is, I'm sure, very refreshing for everybody involved. I'll tell you what I do know about the Lions is there were a few plays in that game where I completely expected them to then lose it. 4th and 25, I expected a hands to a face. I expected a pass interference. I expected some sort of weird call that was going to get Kansas City a fresh set of downs. Reynolds catching the ball in the clear. I was thinking Nebraska. Somebody's going to come from behind and wallop that ball right out. And what did Reynolds do? He looked over his shoulder and he decided to bring back his middle school football teaching and wrap both arms around the football and was going to embrace the hit and not try to be a hero and sidestep and dodge and try to make a touchdown. Go down and don't lose that football. And because of that, I mean, the Lions did winning things to win the game. But take satisfaction, the Lions did make a stop on 4 downs against a Patrick Mahomes team, and do take satisfaction when everybody knows that you're running the football on 3 straight downs. The Lions took a knee at the end of the game. I mean, they earned it.
Yeah, they did. And I'll tell you what, man, we're biased, but I can't remember having as much fun watching a guy on defense do what he does than Aiden Hutchinson. It is a blast to watch him spin around and just go crazy and try to, go after the quarterback. So it's fun to watch. Speaking of like Florida State and Texas and Michigan, as when they were playing Ohio State, they really looked the part. They did not look intimidated in Arrowhead. they looked like they were going to win. It's a different team, man. It'll be fun to watch. So we'll see.
Can't leave without adding the fact that Lions draft picks making plays.
Yeah.
In the 2023 season that I criticized, that other people criticized, they made plays.
Yeah, jury's still out, but early returns are pretty good.
Branch with the pick 6. They traded up for him in the second round. Jack Campbell made a play.
Iowa. Jameer Gibbs making things happen and catching the ball, too.
Made plays. Talked about how he was undersized and he was bouncing off people while running.
Yeah, no, it's good.
All good to see.
It'll be fun to watch. It'll make Sundays more fun for those of us who are Lions fans. I know not everybody is, but fun. And hopefully we'll get the beer tour going with Sam Webb, which is we go to local bars in Ann Arbor and watch the Lions together. Steve and I have been a part of that, so we'll see if that comes up. But Steve, what else, man, before we get out of here?
I just want to remind people to follow, review, and share with your friends, the Professor and the Pundit. The number of listeners continue to grow up. We thank you very much for your support and for you guys sharing it with your friends. We know that you're doing it, so please be able to keep that up.
Yeah, and by the way, thanks again to Nick Hopwood, who hung out with us in the postgame at Oscars for the postgame show, Steve, and was great. And I saw him during the game, and just a wonderful, wonderful sponsor of everything we do here. So thank you again, Nick. And by the way, we read all of your reviews. We love it. Keep them coming in on Apple, on Spotify, and elsewhere. So thank you so much, guys.
And to get a hold of Nick, it's at peakwm.com. But until our next episode, remember, Michigan back-to-back Big Ten football champions. Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue.